Hi there, everyone. My name is Anne. Thanks for tuning into Art on the Creek today. We're in my home studio in Parker, Colorado, and I have gotten out my tin of Hahnemühle postcards. These are so fun. I'll put affiliate links in the description for everything because I think these are a great thing to take with you if you're going on a trip this summer. I use them as warm-ups, and these three here that I've finished aren't quite ready to send yet, so we're going to go over how we prepare them to mail. But look at these. They're about 4 inches by 6 inches, and they've already got the printed information on the back for you to put the address and your message. So let's take a look at this sweet little European robin, and let's see if we can get him ready to travel in the mail today. Here we go. Here's our reference photo. I got this off of Unsplash, and I will put a link to that free reference down in the description for us all to use. And I'm just going to kind of leave it in the frame here so you can see it. I think that works out really well for you to see that on my iPad as I'm working. What I'm using is just a regular Blackwing pencil. I don't have the postcard taped down or anything yet. I'm just drawing it. So I'm thinking about the basic shapes here. It's kind of, his head kind of is an egg shape, and like an egg that's laying on its side, and then that body is a big, fat, round, chubby ball. So I'm just getting the flatness of his head, and then I'm noticing that there's a bit of a hump there as it comes down the back. And then his wing has a great shape to it. It's just a teardrop. If you were to take an oval and then kind of just pinch that end off, that's kind of what's happening with the wing shape. And then there's a little tail down there. And I'm fully aware that I really didn't leave enough room to get all of his feet on here, but that's okay. We can put just a couple toes or the tops of the toes near his ankle there, and we'll put a little hint of the tree so that he can have something to stand on. But getting these little toes in here are going to be no problem at all, even though we've very much neared the end of the postcard. The other great thing about these little postcards is because of their size, they are small. And I think that is really good for us all as artists to be able to change the size of our canvas. You know, you have to approach things very differently when you're painting something very large as opposed to when you're painting it very small. So keep that in mind if you do decide to get some of these postcards. There are a lot of postcards that you can buy that are 100% cotton. So get whichever ones work for you. I happen to buy these, and I'm almost done with the tin, so I'm really proud of myself. I'm going to finish these up this summer, I think. And especially this month is World Watercolor Month, so that might be a good time to send my friends some postcards. I just love getting things in the mail for no reason, and I really think that a postcard is a very inexpensive and good way to do that. So that's something fun you can do with your art, your little practice pieces. Just make little postcards, and then you'll always have something to share a greeting with a friend. Or you could keep them in a photo album and just look at them for yourself. So however you want to do that, you can have a lot of fun with these. I've got the basic feathers in on his wing. Now, I'm not going to paint every single feather. All I'm looking for are shadows, light, and basic trends. That's all I'm searching for when I'm working on my sketch here. I just want to get the gist of what this robin looks like. So I've sketched in his beak. I kind of left that out in the initial drawing because I wanted to wait until I had some other reference points to sketch that in. Right now I'm very, very lightly going around the area where I want to border that orange portion of his feathers up against the white. Now I'm not making that line super, super dark, but I am leaving it in there so that I can see it, so that I can have a good guide. And now I'm going to do the same thing for where those blue feathers transition into the brown or dun colored feathers. As soon as I have those lines delineated, I see that the beak is a little bit off. It's kind of too big and pointing down a little bit. So I'm just going to change that up a little bit here and get that situated more to my liking. The other recommendation I can give you when you're drawing is if you note the little part on his orange feathers on the belly there where it kind of comes up to a point, that is directly under his eye. So those are the kinds of things you can look for when you're drawing. You want to look for relationships. Where does that wing fall in relation to the eye? Where does the beak come in relation to the eye? That sort of thing. That'll really help you with your art if you can look at those relationships. Now, if you're painting along at home with me, great. Just use whichever paints you have on hand. Don't feel that you need to get this particular set of paints. The reason that I pulled this palette out is because it has buff titanium in it. I really enjoy using buff titanium on birds and wildlife that has fur. I just think it really gives it that little extra something. I just really like buff titanium. And if you don't have that one, you can certainly mix. You probably have a titanium white. You can mix an umber with that, or just use a very thin wash of burnt sienna or burnt umber, or raw umber for that matter, and you should be just fine. I'm going to get out my Trekell watercolor brushes here. They're a synthetic Kolinsky sable, and I really like how they hold a point. I tend to save these brushes for small areas and detail. You can see they're kind of an elongated round shape, and they work really well, and I think we'll have a good time using them here today. I've got my postcard taped down to just a piece of chipboard. I've got water, I've got a paper towel. You don't have to tape your postcard down, but sometimes it's a good idea because you don't want it to warp too much. You'll notice I don't have tape along the bottom, and that's because I extended the drawing way down there, so we're going to need to paint along that edge. I'm going to start with a number 4, and I think I'll be able to use this one throughout. The first thing that I'm going to do is just get the robin wet. When you are wetting the surface in watercolor, you want to have enough water so that it shows a sheen, but not too much. You don't want to have any puddles. Now, this particular method that I'm using here, I did use more water than I normally do because of the way that this paper acts. It's not 100% cotton, like I mentioned earlier, and one of the features of this paper is that the paint and water can have a tendency to stand still and then form some interesting cauliflower blooms and puddles. I really like that for bird feathers, so I'm putting on a little bit more water than I normally would because I really want to take advantage of any of the characteristics that this paper is going to extend into my art. Right now I'm going to go in first of all with this Cypress Raw Umber. It is PBR 7, and it's just a really good raw umber type of color, just really kind of a dusty brown. If you don't have that one, you could use raw sienna or burnt sienna. You could just add a little bit of a red tone to your bird. That would be totally fine. He's your bird. Paint him however you want to. In fact, if you don't want to paint a European robin, find something else small that will fit on your postcard and have fun painting that. It's all about whatever you want to do. Whenever you're creating art, it's never about making something right or making something appear a certain way. It's simply about the process of getting paintbrush down on paper. If you can accomplish that in a day, then give yourself the pat on the back that you deserve, because creating art is, the gift of that is in the creation itself. And especially here with the postcard, if you can share that with a friend, that is just magnificent. This is a great opportunity for you to practice using wet on wet technique. The other colors that I have dropped in here, in addition to that Cypress Raw Umber Deep, are a quinacridone gold, and now I'm going in with a cobalt blue. I really like cobalt. It's a great color to make shadows on animals. You can also use ultramarine, but I kind of wanted it to be a little bit more subtle, and the cobalts tend to be a little bit more gentle or subtle in their pigmentation. So I'm just making sure I have all of these shadows here, putting a little bit more of the buff titanium right under his tail. And about now is when your bird might start to look kind of like a hot mess to you. So don't worry about it. It's all going to come together in the end, I promise. It's just that right now we might be going through a little bit of an ugly phase. So you're just going to need to press on and keep working. Be very aware of where your water is, especially on this next section where we segue over into the orange. You don't want to make mud. It's okay for these colors to meet. But when we mix orange and blue, the color combination that results may or may not be attractive on this. So be careful of where you're pushing your water to the border. Try not to bring in the colors that you've already painted, because remember, they're still damp. So we want to make sure and respect that border that's there. Now, it doesn't have to be too hard of a border, and you can coax them together gently, but we just want to make sure that we don't get anything too mixed up. So the colors that I'm mixing now are a Pyrrole Scarlet, and I'm just kind of mixing it in with that Cypress Raw Umber Deep, and I think I'm going to add a little bit of the Hansa Yellow Medium. I just need to tone that down a little bit. It's a beautiful orangish red, but it's just a little bit too much toward the red side right now. So I've got some Hansa Yellow Medium mixed in there, and now I feel like it's at a point where I can just start dropping it in. I really do want to drop it in here because this is going to give us that mottled, uneven look of these feathers. If you look at this bird, you'll see that there's so much floof and texture there that the light is hitting these feathers differently on every single area of this bird. So what we want to do is we want to drop our paints in different consistencies, in different concentrations rather, throughout that chest, that beautiful orange chest that he has. And then I'll go back and I'll work a little bit on the head feathers here, just putting in a few suggestions where there might be feathers, and then blending the rest of it. And remember, this is all wet into damp. This is still wet over here, or damp, on this portion of the bird that I'm working on now. This is the part where it might be a little bit scary. I'm putting in more of the cobalt blue. You don't want to have it mix too much. You don't want to look too green. You don't want to have it get into that orange and have it mix a weird brownish gray for you. What you want to do is just drop in some cobalt, and then if it's too much, like I did here, we're going to gradually tap that back just by lifting off some of it, not all of it, but some of it, with a clean, dry paper towel. You can see on my palette here, I'm using very little paints. There's very little mixing that goes on here. I'm just getting a little tiny bit of a shadow underneath that wing. There's a little bit of a darker area on the feathers right there, and I've mixed in just a touch of that cobalt in with that Cypress Raw Umber just to kind of darken it up a little bit. I'm putting just a little bit more weight on the base of the wing feathers here and just kind of suggesting that some of these feathers are darker and maybe a different shape than the other feathers on the rest of the bird. And it looks like he's got some of that going on in his tail here too, so I'll just kind of suggest that those are there. So you don't have to paint every little single feather. You certainly could. You could go to all of that trouble and focus on that detail. That's not something that brings me joy, so I like to try and paint other ways. Now what I'm going to do is to kind of mix a greenish color. This is the cobalt blue mixing in with the Cypress Raw Umber Deep, and I'm going to put a little bit of an orange in there to kind of warm it up. I'm just kind of trying to get a good mix of a green going here because what I want to do is to get those mosses in on the tree. So let's start by putting some of this Cypress Raw Umber Deep on this side of the tree here, and I've just got the paint a little too thick, so I'll just add some water going around his toes. I don't want to cover his toes at this point. And then I'm going to go in with this green I mixed and kind of drop it in gradual, kind of random places over here on the left, just to suggest that that might be an uneven area of green or moss, which is what we see on the tree branch there. So that just gives it a little bit of interest. Well, now that we've got the log there, we need to anchor our bird to the log. So it's time to work on the feet. When I look at his little legs, what I'm seeing is kind of a pinkish brown. So let's go into that Pyrrole Rubine, which is a PR 254, and we're going to mix that with a little bit of this Blue Ridge Burnt Sienna. Whatever burnt sienna you have, or Van Dyke brown, anything like that. We just want a rosy brown for those feet. And I may have gotten mine a little on the pink side. That's okay. It's just however you want to mix it. You might even enjoy mixing some of that with some Payne's Gray and make it kind of a deep purple that way. If you wanted to lighten it up, you could certainly add some of that buff titanium or add some of your titanium white, and then that will take your mix into more of a pastel range. I'm going to add some of that same color from his feet into the tree just to give it some interest. And now I'm going to make my favorite mix for a gray, which is ultramarine and burnt sienna. And again, in this particular set, it is called Blue Ridge Burnt Sienna. And then we've got an ultramarine intense blue. And this particular one really is very intense. I do like it. I'm going to go ahead and make his beak next. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of concentrating the paint on the edges of where I want it to be, and then I'll go back in with water and just kind of pull those around. That's a really good way for you to give things shape, because when something is curved like this, like a cylinder, if you can imagine a cylinder, the part that's closest to you will be lighter than those two edges that are farther away from you. So by putting the paint on those edges and then just coming back in with clean water, we can get that natural ombre look to happen. The eye, I should have picked up my paper a little bit because I think I kind of messed it up. I was getting a glare, and I didn't want to move the setup that I had here, so I'm kind of fidgeting with this eye here a little bit, and you'll see that happen. Don't forget to leave white space for that little highlight. If you do, though, you can always go in with a white colored pencil or a white gel pen, whatever it is you like to do to add that highlight back in. You could certainly even go back in with white gouache when it's all done and just get that the highlight right back in. Sometimes if we don't paint a highlight in our animal that we're painting, or in a human eye for that matter, anything that has eyes, if we don't put that highlight in, whatever we're painting, the subject may end up looking really dead and vacant, though that highlight is really that spark of life that's in the eye. And it also helps us to find out where that animal is looking based on how that reflection looks. So in this case, I really like that he kind of looks like he's furrowing his brow a little bit. He looks a little judgmental and grumpy. I just love it when animals have somewhat human characteristics. I think they're just so sweet. So we were still working with this mix of this gray that I have here, putting a little bit into the log, just kind of really just dancing around with my paintbrush, just really making little random marks here and there, just to suggest that there is texture on that branch. We don't need to paint every little bit of lichen and moss that's on it. We're just going to make that suggestion and call it good. Now we're going back into that cypress raw umber, and I think I'm going to punch up a little bit of the feathers here on his head. So I'm going to start by kind of drawing like the actual hair style of the feathers, and then I'm just going to go in and do a wash over that, another glaze, because I don't want to have all of the detail. I really like the softness of this. I like the detail on the wing, but I don't think I need detail over the entire bird. Just a little bit is enough here. We don't need to overstate what we're doing. So I'm mixing some of this cobalt blue with that gray mix because I wanted to bring it to a different temperature and really just kind of have it be more gray than it was. This blue tone on his feathers is really kind of a soft powdery blue, and I didn't want to go in with too much cobalt to really make it a cobalt blue because that's a very clear, bright color when it's all said and done. So I did want to kind of dull it down here. And once again, we're putting in a lot more pigment than you might think, but let's just go ahead and absorb ourselves in the process here and trust that this will work. It's very hard sometimes when you're painting that you see something go awry, what looks like it's going awry. But actually it's not. We're just not finished yet. So let's go ahead and keep adding these blue feathers in and using a very light touch. I'm still using my number 4 round. It has an excellent point on it. That's the key to this particular piece because of its size. You really need something fairly small and something that has a really excellent point. So we can go ahead and get all of those little feathers in, and now we can go and add a little more shading underneath the tail and wing. I've gone in with the buff titanium there, and now we're going to add some cobalt to that, drop that in while it's still wet, and that really creates a nice soft shadow. Put a little bit under the tail too, just for good measure. And this painting is no exception. As soon as we've worked on the blue feathers and the tan feathers, got those exactly where we want them, these orange feathers are looking a little pale in comparison, so I'm just going back into that orange area on the palette well there. I'm kind of taking from that orange area a little bit where it's the lightest orange, and then I'm also taking some where it's over next to the brown. You can kind of see how that creates a nice ombre effect to these feathers, and really the way that I'm kind of stippling it in gives it some nice texture so that I don't have to draw or paint every single little feather. I've got enough detail in the blue feathers and in the wing feathers. I don't need any more. I just want these subtle value changes to delineate the change in texture there on the bird's neck. And now I want to take a moment to make sure that this is completely dry, so I am using a heat tool. Once that's thoroughly dry, we can go back into that gray that we mixed with the ultramarine and the burnt sienna and really kind of punch up the values on the beak and bring it into the bird's cheeks so that it's not just kind of stuck on the front of his face, but rather connected to him as part of his anatomy. And here you can see I'm continuing to mix a little bit more of that deep blue, that kind of a Payne's gray or a black with the ultramarine and the burnt sienna. And I'm just barely bringing that into his cheek there. You'll notice that I've left a white space between his upper beak and his lower beak. That's important if you wanted to make sure and include that highlight. If you miss it though, once again, just go back in with something white, some gouache, a gel pen, a paint pen, whatever it is you want to use. I'm still going to fiddle with this eye a little bit, and I'm going to end up having to go over it because I just didn't get the shape right. I don't know why I didn't pick that up so that I could have a better angle on it, but that's what I would advise you. If you're working on something and you're getting a glare from the liquid of your watercolor, it's okay to move your painting so that you can see what you're doing. But if you're stubborn like me, get out a white colored pencil and we're just going to reshape that eye. The colored pencil that I'm using is a Prismacolor. You use whatever you want, whatever you have. I'm just going to kind of give it a better shape. I'm kind of adding this little white border around it. It's going to be a little bit big, and we're going to come back and fix that. I mean that the border is going to be too wide. So this is just a matter of doing and redoing. I'm just kind of trying to sculpt a better eye shape. The reason my Prismacolor looks like that is because I have it in a colored pencil or a pencil extender. These are great things if you don't have them. When your colored pencil gets down to the very nib, or any pencil for that matter, you just unscrew the little opening there where my fingers are holding onto it, and it opens up so that you can put the pencil in there, and then you screw it down tight, and you once again can grip it and really get all of your money's worth out of all your pencils. I am also adding a little bit of soft highlights. I love colored pencil over watercolor for this reason. I can go in and add these soft highlights and suggest that there are some lighter feathers underneath there simply by adding some little white lines. I've also added the highlight on his beak, and now I think we need to come in with a little bit of a different color colored pencil. This time we're going to use a 90% cool gray, and again it's going to be Prismacolor. This part is totally optional, and it's also totally optional to use Prismacolor. You can use your child's colored pencils from their school backpack, whatever you want to use. Don't feel that you ever have to go out and buy new art supplies. It's always best to use whatever it is that you have on hand. The reason that I chose that 90% cool gray is because I did want a little bit of subtlety in the eye and the beak. I added the nostril in as well. If I were to go in with pure black, it might be a little bit too strong. So I wanted to start off with something that wasn't quite black first and then see how it looked. And I'm satisfied. So now I think I'll sign it, and for whatever reason I chose to paint my signature. I don't often do that, but this time I did. And now we want to go ahead and make sure that it is very, very dry. So I'm using a heat tool. If you don't have a heat tool, please let your painting dry completely before we get to that next step, which is applying the cold wax medium. Now you can see when I heat up the washi tape to remove it, it's not sticking at all to the postcard, although it did take some of the surface off of the chipboard, but that's okay. The chipboard is just there to protect my table. So now that we've got all the washi tape off and we're all finished with our little robin here, let's go ahead and get out that wax medium. Now I have a brand called Gamblin. You may have a different brand. They're available under a couple different labels, and they all work equally to my knowledge. I have not had any issues with any of them. So let me just show you how I go about doing this. Here it is. It comes in a little jar. You can also get it in many different sizes, but it's cold wax medium. So what it is you're really going to be applying this very soft wax onto your painting, just directly onto your painting. You want to make sure that your hands are very, very clean. If you don't want to use your fingers, you can put a glove on or use a tissue. Whatever you want to do to get it on there, that's just fine. I like to go in a little circular motion, and I like to start, you just kind of have to hold your breath and dive in. I like to start right in the middle of the painting and just make sure that, that I'm getting everything covered. So when you're rubbing this in, it may pick up a little bit of the graphite. I know that this works very well with watercolor, but I'm going to go ahead and use a paper towel here so that you can see I still have some pencil lines on here, and it will pick up some of those. I'm going to go ahead and cover all of the postcard with this cold wax medium here. I'm using a very little bit. It's almost the texture of coconut oil. It's really very, very pliable, very easy to apply. Right there in this freeze frame, you can see that it has picked up some of the graphite from my pencil. It's not smudging the watercolor, but it is picking up some of that graphite. So you just want to be aware of that. I chose not to erase my lines first because sometimes I like leaving those pencil lines. I think they're part of the whole process, and I really like to leave those in there. Basically, you're just buffing. You're just applying this, a very thin layer, and you're just buffing it out, just getting it to look as even as possible. You don't want to have any big layers or clumps. You just want to have it nice and smooth, a very thin layer, because that is all you need. And now I'm going to go to a clean space on my paper towel and just kind of rub a little bit harder to get off any excess. And this will protect your postcard and give it a nice soft glow too. Isn't that lovely? This can protect all watercolor. Look, we're going to spray it with water. See the water all beaded up on there. And now, normally that would ruin our painting, right? It would lift up all of that watercolor. Look at that, nothing on the paper towel. This is thoroughly protected, ready to mail. You can use this wax medium on watercolors that you hang on your wall, or particularly where I use it predominantly is for postcards that I send through the mail. So as we all progress through World Watercolor Month and take those wonderful vacations this time of year, maybe you'll consider creating some of your works of art on a postcard and using some of this Gamblin cold wax medium, and again, it's available in many different brands, to protect your postcard in the mail. All right, you guys, I hope you really had fun with this today, and I hope you get a chance to paint some fun postcards this month. Take care, everybody. Good luck with World Watercolor Month, and I will be showing you my weekly progress here on this channel so that you can kind of see what I've decided to do in this World Watercolor Month 2024. Happy travels, everybody. We'll see you soon. Bye now.